good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's webinar, Target's SAP Agile Transformation, hosted by SAP Insider and sponsored by Rev-Trac and RSA Solutions. I'm Madeline Grady from SAP Insider, and I will be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions about the information presented in this webinar at any time. Just type your question into the Q&A text box located to the right of the slide window, then click the Submit button. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any technical difficulty, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help ? Icon on the bottom right of the console. Now, on to the presentation. Discussing today's webinar is Dan McCran, Sales Director of Rev-Trac and RSA Solutions, Andrew Jones, Lead Engineer at Target, Natalie Strom, Lead Scrum Master at Target. Dan, can you kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Madeline. Just making sure that everyone can hear me okay? Yes?
You sound great.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Well, so hello, everyone. It's Dan McCran with Rev-Trac. I'm excited to be part of today's webinar, which covers, as we just heard, Target's Agile SAP Change Management Transformation and really Rev-Trac's role throughout that transformation. I've had the pleasure of working with the Target team, specifically the Target SAP Change Management team, over the past 5 years, and I have to say they're a highly experienced and very talented team. You have Natalie and Andrew here today, who are two of the best and been with the team for quite some time, so I hope you get some great insights from them today. Here's today's topics or the agenda that we're going to be covering. Target will take you through their background and history with SAP and their Agile journey, of course. They'll touch on how they used and are using Rev-Trac over the past 5 or so years and wrap up.
Dan, we may have lost some connection. Can you hear us? All right. Well, looks like we may have lost Dan. We'll give him a second to jump back on. If not, Andrew or Natalie, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, we can do that. Maybe we'll give him a second here, and we can let him go back to his portion. Maybe
Absolutely.
Towards the end.
Part of the virtual world we're all living in right now. So appreciate everyone's patience here.
I thought it was going to be me, so. Looks like he's getting back on.
Okay. Dan McCran is back. Sorry about that.
No problem.
We talked about this. Didn't think it would happen. But anyway, picking up where I left off, they'll be talking about their Agile journey, touch how they used Rev-Trac over the past 5 or so years, wrap up with some benefits of both their Agile approach to SAP and maybe some key Rev-Trac capabilities that they've been taking advantage of. But before I pass things over to Natalie and Andrew from Target, I need to take a minute to introduce today's attendees to our company. For those that aren't familiar, Revelation Software Concepts, and we develop and support the Rev-Trac automated SAP change management solution. So hopefully I won't have any more technical difficulties, but here we go. We've been around for quite some time, a small company in Melbourne, Australia since 1997, and we were founded based on SAP change management, sort of built it from the ground up back then. We've been part of that SAP partner network pretty much since it existed, since 2002, when we've had our certifications way back then, and of course keep our certifications current for even S4hana and other SAP applications that are out there today. We have more than, and very happy to have more than 60,000 users when we count them all up at our customers that would have a login to Rev-Trac, so we're happy and thankful for those users. We're always trying to improve the experience they have with Rev-Trac because we have a 100% focus on SAP change management. That's what we do here at Rev-Trac, and we know who our customers are, right? They're the SAP IT teams, the people such as today with Target, the change and release management teams, the SAP development and configuration folks, people that are involved in testing and approvals and documentation of SAP changes, and even to some extent the audit and compliance team. So that's who we are happy to serve, and look forward to meeting some new ones here perhaps after today's webinar. So what do we do for those customers? Well, what we feel we do and what we hear from our customers that we significantly improve their outcomes in many key areas, right? And some of those are listed here. One area is releases, right? We have many customers that were used to working with quarterly releases or monthly or weekly, and we're now moving to some of them to even more frequently, even on-demand releases. You might hear a little bit about that from the target team today. We're also delivering SAP changes to the business faster. That's another significant outcome that we're delivering, because we know that the business users want the changes today, not next week or the end of the month or whenever you might be delivering them. And we also help teams deliver higher volumes of change with the same or fewer resources. Of course, quality is also key. We don't want to deliver more changes at a faster pace if they're poor quality or poorly tested changes. To be clear, Rev-Trac is not a testing solution, but it certainly helps customers get the most out of their SAP testing solutions and processes that they're using today or plan to use in the future. And I'll cover a little bit about that briefly at the end after target slides. You know, all along the way, Rev-Trac is helping lower the cost and risk of SAP change management while enabling on-time, on-budget project delivery and also significantly increasing that overall productivity of the entire SAP team. Okay, one more slide here. So what we see out there today, and maybe many of the people attending today, many SAP customers are managing their SAP changes with a manual or maybe a semi-automated approach today, right? Which means that lots of people are sometimes involved and required to manage the multiple processes and the tools which might be being used. It can also be risky, right? Many times the teams don't have real-time visibility to transport sequencing and dependency issues, or visibility into, let's say, parallel development activities where team members are working on the same SAP objects independently. Now, often in a location halfway around the world in a different time zone, because you might have development activities all over the world. And of course, manual approaches are time-consuming for everyone involved and really limit the speed with which you can deliver those SAP changes to the business. A story that we hear from time to time from people when we begin, SAP customers, when we begin to interact with them, is that it takes longer to document and go through the change management process than it actually does to develop, test, and promote the changes to the various systems. If that's the case, it's upside down, and obviously you can see how that could be speed limiting. And whether it's apparent or not, all of the manual efforts that people are going through add to the cost of managing SAP changes today in SAP environments. So, all right, at this point, I'm definitely excited to pass things over to Natalie and Andrew at Target to let them take us through their Agile SAP change management transformation experiences. So over to you, Target team.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending. My name is Andrew Jones. I've been an engineer with Target for about 14 years now. I will start with the obligatory Target slide. We are Target. If you're not familiar with us, we have been a large US-based retailer since the 60s. If you're not familiar with us, hopefully you've gotten a little bit more familiar with us during the pandemic, as I have, with some of our new channels for order pickup and drive-up services. They have been extremely popular in my family as I've been caring for my two small kids. That's made the Target run a little bit more fun. But aside from being a big box retailer, we've been evolving to fulfill and support guests across a variety of retail channels. So lots of team members, lots of stores, lots of distribution centers, and Target is always focused on giving 5% back of our profit to the communities that we serve. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about the transformation that has occurred in our IT department over the last 5 years or so. Target IT 5 years ago was heavily staffed with a contractor workforce, maybe upwards of 75%. Many of Target's employees were playing a project management role with less of a focus on engineering. That shift has really started, with a change in CIO, change in CEO. where we started to focus on engineering and technology. We started to develop deep engineering skills within our own teams, and really that was a result of our agile transformation. Some of these slides here I've borrowed from our organization that led that transformation, but what has that meant for Target? We really split up into products. We've changed our business processes to be focused on products with a champion or a product owner who would fight for prioritization of critical items, really focused on the customer needs first. When we talk about lean, we had small project teams that were focused on really supporting 1 or 2 products at most, driving forward on critical stories or tasks to make sure that the value was getting to the business quickly. When we talk about Agile, this was the biggest, Agile's been around for a while now, but the biggest thing for us in SAP, we were very, very waterfall. We laid out our releases and how they would be implemented, a year or 2 in advance. The biggest thing for us when we made this shift to Agile is we're focusing more on how quick we could get value back, implemented in production to our business users, to whoever our stakeholders were. So that time on development was more incremental and ongoing rather than a big bang approach. And really what that enabled us to get to was the innovation pieces. Innovation for us came in many forms. One of the biggest things about innovation is you need time to do it. At Target, we were given a focus of 50 days of learning to essentially try new things. It was expected that time would be used to inspire innovation, whether that be taking on new skills that you didn't necessarily have before. And it was all built in your capacity in terms of delivering your regular project work. So when we talk about how that played into a transition to DevOps, it basically set up the mindset that it was okay to fail. It was okay to try new things. And it was okay to remember that at Target, we had a lot of team members transitioning from being engineers, transition into being engineers, as well as shifting roles that they may have played at Target before. So with that said, it was almost like your 30-second elevator pitch was more about how you were innovating, how you were changing, how you were growing to make Target a deeper IT organization, as opposed to maybe some of the other milestones that you had in the patch is just a project manager or coordinating things. In my time at Target, which is, like I said, 14 years, the cultural shift is very evident. Another example that it wasn't too long ago that Target may shy away from a presentation like this, but a culture of sharing amongst, certainly amongst Target, but outside with the tech community has really begun to permeate. With that out of the way, if you do want to learn more about it, we have a public website for everybody, dojo.target.com, that really talks about how we have done different things over the course of the years to evolve to the state we've been. It's pretty good. A lot of good content out there, but I want to focus in more on the SAP challenges that we had during this transformation. So what did the corporate, the big corporate structured organizational change, what did that mean for us in SAP? The first thing it meant for us was, well, we are now empowered to own our products end to end. As an accountable team, that meant we did development, we did testing, we did deployment, and ultimately support. There was no more passing it on to somebody else after it went live. You own the whole thing end to end. With that came the push to evolve, streamline, automate, buzzword. That's all well and good, but without the opportunity to innovate with our own space, we couldn't make any of those things a reality. One of the first things we did was prioritizing our focus on driving value. So nobody really likes doing support work, right? So for us, we wanted to identify things. Well, what would make it easier to support our systems so that we wouldn't have to spend as much time on it, free us up for other things? A specific challenge we had was, how do I deal with a product that is really a packaged software? Other areas in Target were embracing open source, doing their own development, creating their own applications, and here we were with SAP. Well, how do we treat SAP agilely? This was long before SAP started talking about doing DevOps and different things like that. And the answer always was, look back into the space of what you can control. As a member of the basis team back in that time frame, one of the first things we had was a manager who kind of inspired us to to take on that challenge. He kind of pioneered looking into Chef, which is an infrastructure automation tool. And hey, you know, if we're going to support our systems, what's the first thing you always want to do? You want to make sure that the systems are consistent. Consistency is a big thing in change management. We took on automating the management of our profiles at a system level. If somebody made a parameter change, it would get changed back. If we needed to make a change ourselves, we could ensure it was consistently rolled out through the landscape. So that was one thing that touched SAP. Wasn't necessarily, you know, driven by SAP, but something we saw in our team we could do to help improve our own situation and, you know, add a little bit more value by taking us off of the repetitive work and onto the more interesting engineering work. At Target, we have a laundry list of modules that we've implemented. Our biggest ones are ECC and CAR, PI to some extent as well. We are fully upgraded, I think, on NetWeaver 7.5 on all of our systems, or the recent release went in. And we've explored some of the other newer tools that SAP's had to offer in terms of Llama, which is the landscape management tool. We use that primarily to drive automated patching of our systems at an OS level. We've started to explore data intelligence, just getting that stood up, SAP Analytics Cloud for our financial planning, and most recently, Ariba Cloud. So that went live, I believe it was last fall, but I got the pleasure of using it myself when I had to order some equipment to support remote work recently, and it was very smooth, certainly better than it was before. Our hardware, we are on HANA 2.0. We have a number of systems or modules that are running that. The ones that aren't are on Oracle Exadata, and we've got Red Hat Linux VMs, which we've been on for some time. Some of the things that we've done at Target, back in 2011 is when we went to ECC 6. We went to EHP 8 back in 2017, and you know, we've been doing the agile, scaled agile process for over 2 years. In the future, we're looking to implement a vendor income solution, and I'm sure as many of you are, we are doing some analysis and planning for S4, and by some, I mean a lot of planning for that. We're focusing on developing our business case with our partners, what that roadmap looks like for implementation, and ultimately, you know, our change management solutions, how we'll facilitate that rollout. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to, well, it says lead Scrum Master, Natalie Strom, but she's really been building out her engineering skills recently and has had a wealth of experience in our change and release management processes.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I've been an employee at Target for about 6 years now, but as Andrew said, I was one of those folks that was on earlier as part of transitioning from development to an ongoing operations team. So, but now my primary focus is in the change and release management space, and I'm the Scrum Master for our security team on the SAP platform team. So I've been really involved with the agile transformation here that we embrace in our space, and can tell you is a really good change. So this slide here, we wanted to just give you a little bit of insight on how we're structured, who our partners are, and how we work on a day-to-day basis. Change and release management is part of the SAP platform team, so right in the middle there. However, our team has to stay in close partnership with other areas to ensure we're supporting our business and technical priorities, both of them. We partner with product teams that consist of 7 different functional areas, and each has their own set of their goals and their priorities to support their business, and we are just part of that. We also align with our own platform team with our own value drivers too. So the SAP platform team, just to let you know, includes basis, security, database administration, change and release management, data volume management, operations, and also hardware. So you can see that we're involved with a lot of work, and we need to plan carefully so the landscape's available or set up appropriately for whatever teams need to accomplish. And communication is key for all process, tool, and environmental change. So we are all using agile methods to identify, prioritize, and plan out our work. Each quarter, teams discuss and plan work together and agree to those priorities. And as part of planning out the feature, we discuss any impacts and adjustments that need to be made to support it. Once the work's planned out, we meet daily to discuss our stories and adjust accordingly if we need to. So the nice thing about it is we're not pressured for a specific timeline. We plan our best, but can adjust if we need to and discuss those adjustments and replan. Adjusting Rev-Trac paths, timing, or putting things on hold, systems on hold are all part of a story, and we support that within each of our sprints. So we truly use that Agile method. The entire technology organization was tasked with becoming more agile in their space. We had to think in the same fashion. This was not easy for us because the way of thinking was different from our day-to-day norm. We began looking for opportunities to innovate within our space. So some of the examples of that are we utilize Chef to standardize and enforce settings across all of our servers. We use SAP Llama to set up automate patching activities, as Andrew mentioned earlier. We had a large team initiative to automate SAP HANA installation post-steps. That was all written in Python, and then we used Docker for testing. And we also took on owning our own infrastructure. We continue to challenge ourselves every day. Target has made it a priority and has dedicated time for us to learn and innovate. They have even demo days for all of us to show off our team's work. And next, Andrew will talk about our CI/CD pipeline. Andrew? Andrew, you may be on mute.
Yep. Cool. Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. So teams at Target were focusing on how they were going to develop their pipelines for automation, how they were going to shorten their delivery times to production. And luckily, we already had it in the SAP space. We had actually already been a Rev-Trac customer. Just as people were talking, I lifted kind of the tongue-in-cheek, the grassroots initiative, seedlings. We already had the tools to start doing this. We had classic examples of waterfall releases, missing timelines. We had the cascading impacts, the delays. We had all that good stuff, right? The reasons that people want to be agile, we'd already experienced that before the big push. We also, I won't say luckily, but we also had a catalyst or an event that allowed us to prioritize and purchase a tool, and the fact that we had some changes go wrong and we had things go out of order, and it caused some impact, right, to the business, which nobody wants. So we had gone kind of down that path before the Agile transformation started fully at Target. And like everyone else, we did it perfectly our first time, right? I mean, who hasn't just never made a mistake? Well, we did, right? When we first started implementing Rev-Trac, we said, hey, great, we've got this tool now. Let's go ahead, let's put a process in there. Basically what we have today, not many changes, but hey, the tool's going to help us. It's going to be great. So we tried to essentially invent our complex, our rigorous release management structure right there in the tool. And it was successful, absolutely was successful, a lot easier to manage the releases. It was not agile by any stretch of the imagination. We had designed the process itself to be rigid. We had designed our tool to be very restrictive to what users could and couldn't do. Essentially, we became helicopter parents. What we really needed to do was move in small steps towards that larger vision of agility, so to speak. And we weren't afraid to make changes. We just had to wait for kind of the mindset of Target IT to catch up. And what we did was essentially use it as leverage to take some of the training wheels off of our tool, push the envelope, and really drive for a change process that we envisioned us using from the start. And one of the first ways that we did that was to give people a taste of what agile release structures could look like. We came up with a process that we termed as a pre-authorized process, or things that were specifically identified as low-risk changes that could move to production very quickly. A way that we did that safely was we identified the objects that you could put into those transports that would allow you to be eligible. So we would scan those changes, and if you qualified, you could move a change to production, in under 15 minutes. The second major switch in focus was change management became less about governance, less about the coordination of every specific detail of other teams' changes. to shifting back to that accountable teams methodology, we really wanted to be the pipeline for that automation. We wanted to have the consistent processes. We wanted to have a repeatable, audible process, but we wanted to expand the ways that we delivered change. With the right amount of test environments, the right amount of testing for changes, we wanted to provide the vehicle to get there. Well, recently I made the extremely smart decision to try to move in the middle of a pandemic. And as I was packing up my office, I found at the bottom of my filing cabinet this slide that I had presented a number of years ago, probably back in 2017. And I'd be embarrassed to say that, we're looking back at where we were at in our journey at this point in time. It took us 3 years to get back to this mythical total agility landscape that we have there in the top part of the screen. But really what that meant for us was a vision of what we wanted our change management processes to look like. And that was ultimately moving on to what Dan had mentioned, on-demand changes. The fact that we could safely move changes to production, not just in a specific release, but what made sense for individual product teams to drive their own timings, their changes to production based on their testing, and ultimately shift some of those accountabilities of the physical deployment or clicking the button or the rubber stamping, whatever you wanted to say, to the teams that were really responsible for making those changes live. So with that said, I'll let Natalie talk a little bit about the climb up the mountain here, so to speak, metaphorically, and how we evolved slowly to implement our Agile process today.
Thanks. Yes, this is our before model. We had organized 4 different ways for change to move through, and these included on-demand, changes that went to production without a predefined release date. Those included emergency changes. They fit into this model since these types of changes couldn't wait for a release date or a cycle. They were more immediate. Also, our pre-authorized were changes that were done very often, had low risk, and so they didn't necessarily need to fit into a particular release. They were already pre-approved, per se, for when they needed to go in. Weekly, this was a very common method that we used for change for a long time in our organization. We scheduled releases once a week with defined dates and defined guidelines when changes would move through the landscape to production. If changes were not in a particular status or approved for a release, the engineering manager needed to do that approval. They would not be part of that release. So we tried to keep everybody on par for that release, but if they were going to move to production, we had to make a decision whether or not it should have been included or moved to the next release, but we had to have a conversation about it. Monthly was a method used particularly for changes that were bigger with more impact and were determined they needed a little bit more testing. So we had a week-long testing cycle before these were moved to production. And again, if more time was necessary, we would discuss across all of the teams to adjust timing because everybody was on these cycles and cadence. And so if we did have to shift something, we needed to have everybody engaged and involved to understand those shifts in timelines if we needed to make them. And then last, we had major, and this was to support a much larger effort, such as version upgrades where we needed a lot more testing and longer timelines were needed if needed. And again, that was a lot of planning for a major landscape that we needed to support. So we're still moving our way up. In 2017, we upgraded to Rev-Trac 7. We used it as an opportunity to implement new cadence and a more simple process, little steps along the way. We also leveraged the release management functions within Rev-Trac. That function, release management process, really helped for organizing change and increased visibility into what changes were part of a release. We could quickly adjust, change, or remove a release if needed, and others could follow along with it with the ease right in the tool. It was great. We reduced the number of steps in workflows to be more agile and also gave more responsibility to change owners in their teams, trusting more in our partners at the end of the day, which was a huge move. We had to make that mental shift there to not control everything, but also release some of that responsibility to our partners so that they could do the right thing for their change at the right time. So with a lot of those small improvements, we really wanted to take a a closer look, a better look at what was happening. We're still analyzing what's going on. Can we make more change? We just wanted to really understand if we could move to even a more agile process. And so we took a look at the statistics, and we saw a few key things. These are not everything, but a few of the key things that we did find was that 55% of our changes, so more than half of our changes, moved outside of a release. So that was telling us something. And regression testing, we saw, was no longer being conducted as a coordinated effort between product groups. And the main reason we had a lot of our release structure was to support regression testing. Also, why do we have a release if most of the changes are moving outside of a release and the timelines cannot meet their requirements? It doesn't fit. So based on these findings, we thought it was a great time to make our new vision a reality. We simplified our model, ta-da, even more, and this is what we have today. We combined the types of change really into two buckets here. So we have on-demand, which is most commonly used, and release as a service. So the on-demand model supports most of the changes, the normal, emergency, pre-authorized, where change owners can decide when it makes the most sense to move their change into production. There's no specific release date they have to adhere to, and at times they might have to coordinate with other team members or teams for their changes. For example, if one transport has to go before another. However, they can work with other teams. Also, Rev-Trac tool can support it. And all of these types of activities to coordinate, you can do in Rev-Trac very easily. At any point where support's needed that doesn't fit into this on-demand model, we can also create an alternative path or cadence for teams. They just have to go ahead and ask us and plan, and we can work with them to do that. We call that release as a service. We discuss requirements and can set up release and our modified path for teams. And so examples of utilizing release as a service would include such things as upgrades, support packs, or other major projects. Some of the features that we commonly use are oops check, so for overwrite and overtake alerting. This is a great tool that we leverage for people to really think about what change they're putting in and if there are concerns about overwriting an existing change that someone else actually might have or their own change. So it's helped us a lot. The very simple ease of configuration and making changes that's needed very quickly to support feature work. This is just great. We can reconfigure things as we need to for the purpose of feature planning and work, and we can change timelines really easily depending on what people want to do and when. Dynamic approvals have been very useful for us. For example, each team has an engineering manager in charge for production approvals. We also have other positions that team can use to assign people to extend that manager's approval if they're not available, or they just want their team members to be able to do that. So this allows for a lead, for example, to plan and coordinate deployment for the team. The pause feature that we use is we use this often to allow for activations that need to happen before a transport moves to an environment. And most recently, the clone process has been a key feature during a recent upgrade that we completed to support an N+1 landscape. The benefits of following a more agile approach is plenty. By shifting responsibilities to teams to do the work, we're able to reduce the amount of people in the change and release management space. So back in the day, when I started with the team, we had 8 people coordinating releases and 3 people were focused on manually moving transports in. Today, we have about 1 FTE supporting that work. The change process and release schedule we found is no longer a bottleneck. We've made a lot of steps to improve that so people can move their change in more fast. We can ensure consistency as we're able to track changes, and we can rely on the information that the tool is telling us. And it's simple to adjust when needed. When the landscape needs to change, there's no need for a consultation with SAP for any enhancement work. you might have some glaring questions, and so we took it upon ourselves to put a little bit of those together. So you're asking, hey, wait, don't you test changes together? What happened to regression testing? Could you do better? Absolutely. So we took a look, and there is one item there for automated testing. We realized there's a gap there, and that we have no automated testing that runs through our core capabilities. There have been cases where testing issues have appeared, but in general, we haven't had a large concern with that happening. So we haven't had regression testing lately as part of our standard change process. Of course, if there's larger efforts, larger initiatives, that is going to refocus to more testing involved. And we just recently have gone through iterative testing for major upgrades. So it's not like that doesn't exist at all. We fit it in when necessary and don't make that as a requirement for our on-demand cycle. And will this work for my organization, you ask? Maybe. It's everything we've done doesn't have to work for everybody. It certainly helped out our organization to make these improvements. Not every company is going to be able to support you because we've had the overall IT strategy change, the transformation, which has helped us be able to make these types of changes and decisions. However, on our own, we did take a look at some improvements that we could make, and they were small, and we've done small things along the way to improve our process for delivery. But hopefully some of what we said today provides value to you, and you have a few things that you can take away and do things for your organization. And hopefully you've enjoyed some of the things we've gone through in this webinar. So now Andrew has one more thing he'd like to run through with you as far as a challenge for you today.
I think daytime talk shows used to call us like the final thought, right? So anyway, so challenge, right? I see a lot of great questions rolling in, and we're definitely going to have time to get through a good number of those. But kind of a final challenge from our side. So every person on this call today has the opportunity to be the individual on your team that starts thinking a little bit differently, right? You can help set that long-term vision and start moving in the direction. For instance, it took us 5 years to evaluate and find a tool that we were going to purchase for this, right? It took us another long time to get to kind of where we had originally saw ourselves going. Every company's not going to be able to necessarily jump on this right away, right? But there are certainly things that you could do today to improve the processes that you participate in or own, right? Analyze the steps that add value. A lot of questions about the regression testing. Calling something regression testing, if it wasn't true regression testing, we found didn't add a lot of value, and all we were doing was slowing up teams who were already responsible for testing their changes. That was one of the reasons that we don't call it like a formal regression testing period. We decided that we could proceed without it, and as we see impacts, or if we run into a large amount of issues, we'll have to relook at the way we're doing it, reevaluate, and say, hey, maybe we need to go and talk about some automated testing solutions or figure out ways to integrate that in part of the process. We looked at where we could shift ownership. Where can you shift ownership in your organization today so that each person that's essentially touching the process is improving it or adding value to it? And ultimately, the goal in automation is to get rid of the amount of people that it touches, reduce the steps, and keep things going consistently. What are some things that you see that you could address for the future, right? So you can set that goal out there and start taking small steps to it. And that's what we had done. We started with the pain points that were felt by most people, which is the logical place to start, built that confidence up, and eventually transitioned to where we are today. If I look back at where we started, it looks nothing like we're at today. But the beauty of all that is most of the people who are still around back when that started, they don't remember that time, right? Because they just slowly adjusted and transformed along the way. It doesn't have to be this big boom, everything's solved with 1-2 clicks of the button. You can transition to that as long as you have a good place or a good foundation of where you want to get to. So with that said, I think Dan has a few wrap-up slides before we get into the questions, and that will be exciting. So thank you, Dan.
Perfect. Yeah, well, wow. Andrew, Natalie, thank you very much for sharing those experiences with us today. I felt, hopefully others felt, that was great information, help others on their journey to make SAP more agile, their SAP change management process is more agile, and ultimately, right, be more responsive to the changing business requirements that customers are facing these days, right? I really love how you ended things with some of those questions about how to really challenging the status quo is the way I'd sort of describe it, and and how to move forward with this type of approach, because I think both Andrew and Natalie had mentioned that it was a cultural shift. It took time. It wasn't always easy, but the results look very good, right? And Andrew said lots of questions, and we'll move into those in the next couple minutes. I just have a couple slides here. I wanted to wrap a couple things up with those slides and then move to Q&A. We're getting some really good ones, and we should be able to cover a lot of them today. So we heard really why and how Target pivoted to an agile approach, but we know that every SAP customer has their own unique situation. Andrew was just talking about that. So why might you consider an agile and DevOps approach to SAP or for SAP? Well, we feel that this particular slide from a 2019 Gartner report is a good place to start, right? You have to put a business case together. And I noticed that in the translation, I didn't give the proper credit. So to be accurate here, there should be a footnote that this came from a Gartner report called 5 Questions I Know Infrastructure and Operations Leaders Should Ask Before Funding a DevOps Initiatives. And we could point you to that report because we want to give Gartner the proper credit there. But this chart gives you some good outcomes, which are important to many organizations, these days, and can really help you build that foundation for that business case I just mentioned, right? It's a balance of internal and external outcomes. And you can sort of see some of the ones, that I mentioned before, right? Faster cycle times pretty much equate to faster release times, and the on-demand type of movement that Target's doing. You certainly get some side benefits of people enjoy their jobs better if you can get things in quicker and fewer defects and those types of things. So that we find that's a good place to start, right? And then, as we heard, really Agile about automation, Agile and DevOps. And there are different areas of automation specific to the SAP change management processes. We heard Andrew and Natalie talk about Chef for the automating their profile settings, I think they said, or configuration settings. I'm not an expert in that by any means, but a year or so ago, we had a poll question during one of our webinars regarding which one of these 4 are of most interest to our webinar attendees. So it was a little bit skewed. Here are the results. I'd say that they definitely these results line up with what we're seeing today. If anything, the interest in automated SAP testing tools from companies like Tricentis, Worksoft, Micro Focus is even more so today. And I think Target was saying that they continually look to see if those types of tools might help them out. We're seeing a lot of adoption from our customers' interest and even integration requests for those types of automated testing solutions. Of course, the big one in this chart is automated SAP change management. Of course, we'd expect that to be high on the list because the people were at one of our automated SAP change management webinars, so we know they logged on to the right webinar at least. Impact assessment is something people are looking to automate these days. Solutions like Live Compare are now owned by one of those testing companies, Tricentis, or even SAP's BPCA, right, the Business Process Change Analyzer that some people have chosen to use. There's been a steady level of interest over the years with those solutions, and that came in about where we'd expected. And there's also a fair amount of interest these days in SAP automated system copy solutions. A company there that we know of and have a bit of a partnership with is EpiUse, and they help with that sometimes painful system refresh process. And the reason we're briefly mentioning these other solutions, right, because Rev-Trac is really just an automated change management solution, is because we know that change management, SAP change management, doesn't exist in a vacuum. And some SAP customers really want to develop some type of end-to-end automated CI/CD pipeline to manage those processes. And that's really a core capability of Rev-Trac. And we which is to enable and orchestrate that highly automated DevOps tool chain or CI/CD pipeline, or as Andrew mentioned earlier, whatever current buzzword might be used to describe that end-to-end process, right? Scaled Agile framework and those types of things. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into this slide in detail, but what we're showing here is how Rev-Trac operates at the SAP layer, because we're an ABAP-based tool going via transports. But we integrate and communicate And we're managing, of course, all the change and transport management, as Natalie was describing, but we're integrating and communicating bidirectionally with other applications that are part of the process, right? We do this with our modern, secure, and really flexible REST APIs that are built into and included with Rev-Trac. So again, this is a topic if we'd like to follow up with any people on the line today. This is normally an intro slide that we get into during initial discussions. But again, I want to get to Q&A here. So, we heard some of these bullet points listed here that are unique to Rev-Trac that we're very happy and thankful that Target had pointed out, right? The release management workbench that Natalie had mentioned, which they use extensively. Parallel development, which is workbench, which is actually an extension of what we call extended locking, lets you know that colleagues are working on things at the same time as you. Natalie mentioned OOPS. I know Target recently upgraded to latest version of Rev-Trac just a month or two ago, and don't believe they're using this PODS, Peripheral Object Dependency System yet, but they will be able to take advantage of it because it's included there. And that's a look before you leap. We can let the teams know that are using Rev-Trac if they're going to move a change into a target system, and if there's any dependent objects. It only works at the workbench level, the data dictionary type objects, if that is in the target system or not, and we'll warn you before that. We have some other features, cloning and auto retrofit, and reporting, things we didn't cover today, but these are definitely things that other customers take advantage of within Rev-Trac. So wrapping up, a couple last things about Rev-Trac and Rev-Trac Platinum. Rev-Trac has been around for, like we said, 20 years, and 2 years ago, we renamed it Rev-Trac Platinum because Platinum is the 20-year anniversary medal. So we just sort of had a marketing relaunch of the same product. But it is an all-in-one solution. So things that you saw today, they're all included. We don't have an a la carte pricing model. We just want to build a relationship with our customers like Target and many others, and then just work with them to help them manage change as their environments and needs change. Many of our customers end up doing self-service upgrades. That one I mentioned with Target. They pretty much took it all themselves, opened a support ticket. We had a discussion about it, but they are a highly experienced team, and we're able to take that on themselves. We deliver these outcomes very quickly, normally measured in weeks, to get Rev-Trac up and running. Transitioning to a fully scaled Agile framework at an environment like Target, as we saw, that takes some time because there's cultural change and other changes that have to come about during that time. But Rev-Trac's there to support you each step of the way. And as a company, again, we're 100% focused on change management. And look forward to answering questions. So let me pass things over to Madeline, and she was going to start with some of the questions. I think we're up to about 30, so I don't know if we're going to get through them all, but we'll do our best to answer a lot of the questions that are coming in through the chat session.
Absolutely. Just a quick thank you as well to Natalie, to Andrew, and Dan, you two, for an excellent presentation. And as a reminder to our attendees, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question into the text box located beside the slide window and click the Submit Question button. So our first question is Rev-Trac compatible with SAP S4hana?
I'll take that one. It's a sort of a product question. So, yeah, absolutely. So S4hana, we have customers running it on 1909 and other versions in between. So, yes.
Fantastic. And to that point, does Rev-Trac work in the SAP Cloud Platform?
Another product one? Yes, and it does. And that's, we have customers using it, and we've adapted Rev-Trac to work in SAP or the SAP Cloud Platform. And it actually works technically. I won't go too deep into it, but it uses SAP CTS Plus to help us move those changes. But yes, if that was the question, that's a definite yes. Great.
Does the tool have the capability to clone ABAP and non-ABAP transport to an N?
Another product one, and I know I saw some Agile ones coming up. So, yeah, absolutely. We can handle N+1, N+2, N+ whatever type scenarios, and we have an automated cloning or retrofitting, as many in the SAP world call it, capability to help you automate the movement of those changes from the, let's say, production support environment to the project environment or upgrade environment or whatever it might be. So, yes.
Fantastic. To what extent are you utilizing public cloud for the SAP estate?
I think that would be too.
Yeah, I'll take that one then. So public cloud, we have our Ariba cloud solution. We have Concur, and we have Analytics Cloud, which we just got. So we have not moved our other core modules to public cloud.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, are you applying SAFe? An example, big room planning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Natalie. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, yes. When we moved into the Agile methodology, we had to examine how we were going to actually work with all of the teams together in such a large group. So, yes, we did implement the SAFe model, and it worked very, very well for us. We had a couple days of going through each of our product areas' key initiatives and what priorities were set for each, and we all had to plan across all of the key top priorities within our platform and product teams, all of us together, and detail out that work in our various sprints.
Great, thank you. What did you define as product?
For us, products, at least in the SAP space, was more around the, we had listed them out one of the period, but kind of that business process. So, other areas of target might be a mobile app or whatever it is. But for us, it was more like business processes was our products in SAP.
Right, the functional areas. There's a slide that's detailing that information out if people wanted to look at that further.
Great. And to that point, is this product or value stream?
I would say product. Not too familiar with value stream.
Perfect. Our next question is, how does the IT business alignment look like? Is this one team organization?
No, we have an IT organization, and it supports other pyramids within Target. I would say that the product owner is mostly representing those business needs for their product. I don't know if that.
Great, thank you. Our next question is about scanning. Is this part of Rev-Trac?
I'm assuming that's about the pre-authorized changes I was talking about. We entered in objects that we flagged as pre-authorized in Rev-Trac, and then Rev-Trac enforced it. So yes, it did the scanning.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what was the reporting or communication structure at Target that evaluated these changes and decided whether they could be classified as on-demand or break fixes or major changes? For example, is there an architecture group that has an overarching role across all functional and technical streams?
We do have architects. Back when we originally made those changes, the main method we used was we looked at previous changes and impacts that they may have caused. We had teams, we'd go through the different examples of the change and looked for impacts. We didn't necessarily have a formal process outside of overarching process to go through those, but we did do some due diligence to make sure that those changes went in smoothly before we made them pre-authorized. In terms of the other releases, especially as we move more agile, that's up to the team to determine how much testing they need and how much risk they were averse to.
And about our communication structure too, it is challenging to communicate and get everybody coordinated, but that's part of that SAFe model. That's part of that planning model where people should understand where things are being changed. We also have Slack as a communication channel in which people are told information. We also have meetings to communicate to various teams as well for coordinating our efforts.
Great. Our next question looks like similar to a product question, but does Rev-Trac integrate with other solutions such as Jira and ServiceNow?
I'll take that one. And yes, that one slide, I guess I could pull it up here quickly, just because it mentions both of those. Push to audience. Okay, so I think you're seeing it now. Yeah, we have especially those two applications because they're very popular with many of our other SAP customers. We have integrations with both Jira and ServiceNow and some of these other applications you see on the screen here.
We have Jira at Target. We have not like formally integrated them via API, but we definitely reference like our stories in Jira are linked to our Rev-Trac changes.
Yeah, just capturing the information. Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
Great. Our next question is, you mentioned your own infrastructure. So are these all on-prem systems? Are you not leveraging cloud-based systems? The slides in the next question is regarding a slide deck. So just for everyone's reference as well, we'll send out a link to access the slide deck. But regarding your own infrastructure, are these all on-prem systems? Are you not leveraging cloud-based systems?
Yeah, so the comment about the owning our own infrastructure, that really became part of our SAP platform team itself. We do manage our hardware actually separate than the rest of the target infrastructure group. So we kind of brought that all in-house. Most of our systems are on-premise, aside from the exceptions I talked about for the cloud.
Great. Our next question is, how do you do regression testing for those on-demand releases?
Well, the question is, you want to take it, Natalie? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, for on-demand, it's really, we don't require regression testing per se ourselves. So teams can take it upon them to perform any testing necessary and coordinate with other teams. However, if they utilize the on-demand process, it's really in their court as to what they do in terms of testing to move through the environment.
And again, since we moved to those product teams, we're seeing a lot less impact because the way that things are divided, it seems like teams are more in their own buckets. Certainly this won't be true for everyone that's implemented SAP on this call, but in our space, it's worked out that way so far.
Great. Our next question is the functionality you implemented not possible via Solution Manager alone?
I think it's possible. I think it would cost you a lot more, and it would take you more time, but we do utilize Solution Manager a lot at Target. We have a large implementation.
Are you using SAP Business Process Change Analyzer to evaluate the possible side effects?
We are not. We predominantly use the OOPS reporting built into the Rev-Trac tool.
Great. Next question is, lots of excellent benefits. Are there any negatives with the move towards Agile?
I mean, I'll take this one. I'm sure Natalie has some thoughts. I think communication is difficult. I mean, Agile, it was difficult before Agile. It's difficult with Agile. With more teams empowered to kind of march to their own beat, you can see that there are opportunities where, communication sometimes falls short. And focusing on that, I think, is a good step forward for, all of our teams that are working in SAP.
Yeah, with the speed of agility, right? It's we do things quickly and we move fast. So for everybody to get that information, that has been a challenge. But I would say on the flip side, I think this model works really well, better than our old model.
Great, thank you both. Next question is, how many changes are you making a week? How many environments are you using? And how are you assuring that the testing is completed?
When we first started, we had 7 different hops that we made to production, which was absurd. And predominantly that was driven by testing at the time and the data in different environments. We have scaled down to basically a dev stage production. We do have another N+ landscape that we spin up when needed. As per the amount of changes that go on each week, 10 to 15, so not a ton, but it's a lot more consistent than it was before, where we would just dump a whole bunch in at one time. And how are we ensuring testing completing? We aren't necessarily doing that. We are capturing or requiring testing documentation attached to each change, but the teams are determining what testing to conduct.
Great. Next question is, what is the size of the Agile team? How many basis, security, development, functional, enterprise, job scheduler, and integration teams?
Let's see here. Basis has maybe like 15, and that's like onshore and offshore, but the basis team supports like all the HANA databases, supports the infrastructure and other basis-related tasks. Security, I think we have like 5. Development and functional, I'm not sure. 100, 200 maybe total?
Yeah, I think when we were first moving into this Agile method, because of the SAFe model, we had a large amount of people. I think we were just under 200, if I can remember correctly at that point. However, Target's made some changes since then, so I don't know if we've necessarily counted recently.
Okay, great. Our next question is, because Agile is an interactive process and many changes to the same objects can be released across sprints, how does your process ensure that lower versions of code is not left behind, not approved and skipped, only to be approved later, and then downgrading the object in production?
So we have, again, the OOPS protection, which we rely on heavily. It essentially interjects before you approve a migration to an environment by scanning to see if it's overtaking or overwriting code and not downgrading objects. Now, I will say it pops up the message. Sometimes our teams click continue and they do it anyway. That's a configurable thing, but as part of the on-demand process, we've pushed a lot of that responsibility onto the teams. Certainly, we come back and help them once that's happened, but you can configure it to your own desire, basically.
Perfect.
Great. Do you have an approach to deactivate production transport / functionality quickly?
To deactivate? Not.
Deactivate
I guess.
production. Oh, that's like a back out, I think, is what we're saying. Yeah, it's just Rev-Trac does have a back out utility, but I know Target doesn't use it, and you just go the standard traditional SAP way. If you break it, you got to get a fixed transport as quickly as possible. Is that accurate, Andrew and Natalie?
Yeah.
Yes,
so they would just do another on-demand change if they realized they made a boo-boo, and then do it quickly, right?
Exactly. Yeah, but just to be clear, Rev-Trac does have a back out capability, but I don't believe Target's not using it, doesn't have the need for it. So.
We have not, no.
Okay. How do you ensure appropriate testing is done before a change is scheduled to production?
I let the engineering manager that puts their name on sending it to prod determine that. That's how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds a little bit cavalier, but
That's what's the change in ownership, right? So like the ownership is on our change owners and our engineering managers to make that decision in the right timing of when it's ready.
And honestly, the reverse I would ask is like, how would you determine for every functional area what the appropriate level of testing or if the right testing was done? And the answer from a change manager perspective is that would be impossible, because I'm not intimate into each of those functional areas, and I don't think any one or two people or panel could be, right? You're just asking questions. You're not making the team test the right things.
Good point.
And if they break it, they fix it. So they have, skin in the game.
Absolutely. Did you see improvements in downtime in your infrastructure, or how do you handle production outages?
Kind of a separate topic. We have done things at Target to reduce downtime. The biggest example, I kind of touched on it briefly, was the automated patching. So before, when we schedule these giant outages for all these patches quarterly and all this stuff, and take forever, and it was ridiculous. We introduced a kind of an automated patching that would take down systems briefly to do the patching, which, maybe a half an hour. And now I know the team, since I've moved off, has worked on not bringing systems down at all. They're just kind of rotating through app servers for patching. In terms of implementing like support packs or other things that cause downtime, SAP keeps coming out with near zero downtime and all these other different methodologies for doing it. It's kind of outside of what Rev-Trac does, but it's more of a whatever some tool they're using. That's all I have for now, I guess.
No, I appreciate it. Our next question is, what are the number of changes, just a ballpark range, are implemented in a weekly, monthly, or quarterly release?
I think we might have to follow up on this one. And since our new model, we haven't really had quarterly and monthly releases for a long time now. And our on-demand model is just when it's needed, but we can give you some numbers as a follow-up if you wish.
Okay.
Great. Next question refers to some pain points, but what were some of the growing pains you had switching to Rev-Trac Agile methodology?
Well, I mean, it was pretty easy to make the switch technically. Functionally, teams really liked it because a lot of times we were doing 6 a.m. Friday releases, I believe it was, or late Thursday promotions.
Originally it was Friday, and then we switched to Thursday, yeah.
Yeah, so honestly, it was more about them just saying, we'll coordinate when we go on? Yep, absolutely. When does it make sense to go in for you? When won't it impact whatever job schedule's running, or this, that, or the other thing? So I think there wasn't a ton of pain points, really.
Have you integrated Rev-Trac with your Agile ALM tool where you are tracking your features, user stories, and defects? If so, where do you trigger from? An example, user stories and defects. We
have not officially integrated via the API. We just write in our stories as a reference in our changes. Each team uses Jira a little bit differently, so we're super militant about that integration.
Yeah. Great. We also, there's Jira, but then we also have ServiceNow, where we could have changes related to an incident. We could have changes related to a Jira item. We just require some starting point for documentation purposes in the RCR. Great. Our next question is, switching from primarily contractor-based employee system to core FTE can be difficult. Has your team been able to more readily nail down standardization of processes?
Well, it was difficult. I know that. Everyone took on a bunch more responsibilities that they didn't necessarily have before, but it also made things a lot more transparent. Not that contractors are hiding things or anything like that. It's just that when you're not involved necessarily in all those steps as a team, you don't necessarily have them top of mind. How do we nail down the process? I think as we went through the process, lots of things jumped out of things that we could either change or streamline. So it was actually kind of a positive source. We realized it didn't take as much for our team to do it as opposed to having contractors do it at the end of the day, I think.
We also, like Andrew said, realized a lot of different things that we didn't necessarily need or require anymore. We asked on a lot of processes whether or not is this absolutely required? Do we need this much time to do this or that? And we got rid of a lot of the things that took quite some time to get done.
Great. Our next question is, I take it your teams have the capability to move changes to production during business hours. How do you ensure a CHG does not cause any disruption in production?
Well, I have the same question as before. I look to the person who signed it, and if something goes wrong, I let the person know. No, but overall, we do allow changes during business hours. But really for us, business hours are becoming always anyway. We have a team that's running business processes, either, onshore or offshore. Business is 24/7. So there's definitely quieter periods of times. We try not to implement things during like a financial close. We have freeze periods, targets sensitive to changes in that last quarter where we do most of our business. But overall, the time of day is not necessarily something that we are focused on.
Great. Next question is, I find it difficult to comprehend how many prerequisites need to be met to make an SAP environment agile and Devops adoption focused. For example, is it necessary to implement technical bill of materials in Solution Manager? It also seems like a lot of tools will be required, for example, Jira.
I think it is difficult to do all that stuff. I'm not sure the relation. We haven't done all that stuff in the Solution Manager with the technical bill of materials.
Right.
I'm not sure I have a great answer for the rest of it. We certainly have a lot of tools.
Sorry, I was going to say, Natalie sort of touched on this before, is your process before, you had a lot of things in place that you realized maybe you needed, maybe you didn't need, right? So you took a hard look at your processes and tried to streamline and simplify them. Is that accurate?
We really did. That's absolutely accurate.
I think, and I think we try not to obsess over the tools, right? We try to use the tools that the organization is kind of putting forward. We're not trying to introduce a whole bunch of new tools. I think that's important. Before it was tool craziness. Now there's set direction on what tools you should and shouldn't be using.
Great. How do you move dependent Rev-Trac?
I'm not sure I understand that one.
So I guess if there's the way I'm reading that is if there is one Rev-Trac that's dependent on another, right? So you can define manual dependencies in Rev-Trac. That pods that I had mentioned that I know Target isn't using yet would identify, simple thing is if a Rev-Trac has a report in it and it references a table and that table is in a different Rev-Trac, then, the new Rev-Trac functionality would identify that this report can't move without that table in the target system, in the target being used the wrong term, in the destination system. But you can define manual dependencies in Rev-Trac from, if the developers choose to do that, I guess, would be a quick technical answer to it.
We've both. We've used dependencies within changes. We've also inserted those actions, with the latest upgrade and utilized the pause feature too. So either way. Yep, we've done both.
Great. Our next question is, does it work with SAP Ariba, and is there any integration with Azure Devops?
I'll handle the Azure Devops, and with our REST APIs, we still have that screen up there. It's not shown on there, but it certainly can be integrated with Azure Devops. I can't think of a particular customer that's done that yet. I'd have to check our entire customer base, and it's not in play at Target. The other part was with Ariba. Maybe that's, from what I know, Natalie and Andrew, Ariba is not, not a traditional tool that's done with transports, either normal transports or CTS plus transports. So I'm not sure. I don't think you're using Rev-Trac necessarily for that, unless you're just using it as a sort of a coordination and approval.
We have configuration that integrates with our ECC system, but we don't specifically move Ariba changes per se through our landscape.
Right. Yeah,
specifically for Ariba, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Great. Our next question is, I assume you have a DTAP or OTAP landscape. Can one stage from one place to another, an example from T to A, at any time, or is there still some sort of a release calendar?
We have a high-level calendar of events that we are planned, through our planning session. So, if we were doing support packs, we would put out kind of a calendar of when systems will be upgraded and different things like that. We only create releases now when they're requested per se. So, we don't necessarily have. We used to have a calendar for releases, but that went away in the last iteration here for us.
Great. In terms of tool, what advantage does Rev-Trac over Solution Manager Charm? It has all the capabilities that are there in Rev-Trac.
Okay. I'll start off there as certainly an offline discussion, but, Andrew or Natalie, I think, Andrew, you said before, it's just, could this be done in Solution Manager? I think your answer was, it possibly could be, but I think you referenced cost or effort or time or something like that. So
yeah, I mean, from there, just the configuration is the easiest thing. We upgraded Solution Manager 2 or 3 times. It doesn't affect our change management system really at all, other than the point in time that the system's down. With Charm, I think you're going to be going through, any type of upgrade that you do with Solution Manager. You're going to be revisiting a lot of things. Any of the customizations that you made are going to have to be remediated. For us, we can change our landscape in 10, 15 minutes end to end for whatever we have going on. Very flexible.
Okay.
Great.
Fair enough. And happy to follow up on that offline. So,
for companies that are using Charm now, with Rev-Trac, what will happen to their exiting Charm?
Yeah, so Charm, make the distinction between Solution Manager and Charm, and Charm is a capability of Solution Manager. So as Andrew had mentioned, they still utilize Solution Manager heavily at Target, but they just don't use Charm. There's really not a business case or a need where customers would be using Charm and Rev-Trac at the same time. It would be, one or the other is typically what we see. So.
Great. Can you provide a demo for the perfect platform you're recommending?
Well, we can do demos. We love to do demonstrations. Certainly not part of today's webinar, but we're happy to show a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of what you see on the screen there today in a live demo, and we feel that's a unique advantage to Rev-Trac. Yes.
Great. And our last question for today, only because we are at the top of our time, using Oops, do you have less troubles involving object locks?
Well, we have less. Definitely have less issues overriding objects. In terms of locking, if you do try to put objects in different requests, it's essentially a little bit configurable to like a warning or an error. It gives you advance notice that that's happening. You can stop it completely if you want, even extending beyond SAP's object locking. We don't get a ton of the parallel object requests anymore, though, but it's certainly a feature in Rev-Trac.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. If we didn't get to your question, which I know there are quite a few here, someone will follow up with you within the next few business days. Dan, Andrew, and Natalie, do you have anything you'd like to add before I wrap things up?
Just wanted to say thanks for having me. Sorry, just wanted to say thanks for having me here today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It was a lot of fun. If you guys, I know we didn't get to all of them, but if you did want to reach out, you can look us up on LinkedIn. Natalie and I'll talk to you if you have individual things you want to ask about that we couldn't get to with our limited time today. We're happy to share out. Thank you.
Wonderful. I just want to say thank you again so much to Andrew, Natalie, and Target for allowing you to do this today, and for everyone attending. But we are taking even more of your time here, so thank you again, everybody. Appreciate you attending, and we look forward to any further conversations you'd like to have with us. Thanks, Madeline.
Fantastic. Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar hosted by SAP Insider and sponsored by Rev-Trac and RSA Solutions. Shortly after the live event, we'll send you an email reminder to access this presentation on demand, as well as share with your colleagues. This email will also feature a link to access the PDF copy of this presentation deck. On behalf of the SAP Insider and our presenters, thank you for your time and have a great day.